This week on Q&A, a look at the man who's been active recently in the Senate debate on financial assistance to the automobile industry. Senator Bob Corker is a Republican of Tennessee and a member of the Senate Banking Committee. A programming note, this interview was recorded prior to the deadlock in the Senate over a package to provide $14 billion in help to GM, Chrysler, and Ford.
Senator Bob Corker, there's some press about 7 months into your term that said you were miserable in those first few months as a senator. Is that true, and why?
Well, it was more like the first 5 weeks, okay, but I came to the office early in the morning. I'd have 27 or 8 meetings a day, and I'd leave there at night feeling that I had accomplished nothing. And so really we formally called time out in our office after that first 5 weeks and realized that the only way I was going to have impact, or the kind of impact I wanted to have, was to focus on those big issues and to look at them well in advance of our time to take them up in the Senate, and to really develop a vocabulary and an understanding of those so that I could influence the outcome. And so once we began doing that, which was really early on, it's made my service here very fulfilling.
Why did you want the job in the first place?
I had, I began my public service actually after going on a mission trip to Haiti, and it had a huge impact on me. And I started working in the inner city of our community, and saw we had a lot of people that didn't have decent housing. So I created a nonprofit with others to solve that problem. About 10,000 families have benefited, but I started talking about it, ended up being the mayor of our city. I was commissioner of finance for our state prior to that. All of that was really an outcropping of just wanting to solve problems. And so eventually our nation, it seemed, had numbers of problems that needed to be focused on, and I ran a campaign that talked about those specific things. And I just think that I think actually public service is a very, very noble cause. And I actually had this debate earlier in life. I was a business guy, as you know, most of my life, and candidly, being in the public arena was just not part of our family conversation, okay? It just wasn't it. And so I had this big debate with myself, if you will, about whether I could make more of a difference in the private sector, where you create jobs and you have direct relationships with the families that are impacted by that, or doing so in the public arena. And I have to say that certainly the public arena is a place where you can have tremendous impact on people, and that to me is a very fulfilling thing to do, and I felt like I could do that here in the Senate. A lot of people said, look, you're a business guy, you're going to really not like being in a deliberative body like the Senate, but I have found that if you focus on a few very important issues, it's very fulfilling, and the learning process has just been incredible.
You caught everybody's attention in the media a little while ago in a hearing with the automobile executives sitting in front of you. And I'm going to use a little bit of that during this hour to get you to tell us how you go about your job. But first, I want to show something that doesn't happen very often in the United States Senate, and it's a Democrat, you're a Republican, talking about you for about 45 seconds, and he's the chairman of your committee. Let's watch this.
Okay.
Let me say to our guests here, our hearings, that Senator Bob Corker, who is a new member of the Senate and sitting in the seat I sat in not that many years ago, at the very end of the table, works as hard as any member of this committee does to understand issues that come before us. And as the chairman of this committee, I'm very grateful to him. He was invaluable back several months ago in working through issues that were tremendously complex and difficult. And you are a workhorse, and pleased to have you a part of this committee, and your suggestions and ideas, and always trying to figure out a way for us to get things done. And this committee doesn't function well on a partisan basis. In the 22 months I've been chairman of it, we've never acted that way. And virtually every issue we've come out of this committee with, we try to seek consensus and work forward.
Did that surprise you when he said that about you?
Well, I appreciate it, obviously. I mean, all of us want to be known for work ethic. I have really enjoyed working with Senator Dodd, and I don't think any of us advance our country by just being opposed I think that trying to seek a solution is what all of us should try to do here. And I was very candidly felt very privileged to be at the table when we were trying to work through the financial rescue. Actually, Senator Dodd allowed me to do that. In some ways, I know the Republicans decide that, but I think you know, it all comes together in unique ways, and I happened to be there, and I was glad to help play a productive role there. And anyway, it was deeply appreciated that he said it, and yes, I was sort of surprised at that hearing to hear that, but again, I hope that I'll continue to be someone that people on both sides of the aisle seek on certain issues, certainly not on every issue, but on certain issues to play a productive role.
You know, people often talk about the abilities of interviewers in the media, but they never talk about the ability of the senators and members of the House in questioning the people sitting in front of them. And we here have thousands of hours of that. Mm-hmm. What do you think of that process? And how do you approach the time you have in order to get something from a witness?
Well, it's, first of all, you'd be a great senator because I've seen you interview people. And a part of a hearing is really to inform other senators and to inform the public when you think about it. And so, you know, it was really, I actually asked Senator Dodd prior to the hearings where he was going. In other words, what was his goal? You know, we don't, obviously Senator Dodd and I disagree on numbers of issues, okay, but at the end of the day, where are you trying to take this committee as it relates to this issue? I went to Washington, to New York prior to these hearings and spent 2 days with industry analysts. I mean, from early in the morning to late at night. I met with 6 or 7 industry analysts on the auto industry, people that represented bondholders, people that represented equity holders, people that had actual real private investments in one of the companies, and tried to understand, you know, how the industry is arranged, what the capital structure, especially of General Motors, is, what some of the issues are that they're dealing with. These are people that have real skin in the game, and so they have a real point of view as to what it takes for these companies to be successful. That was invaluable. And then Wednesday before the hearing, I met again with the companies. They'd already been in, as you know, 2 weeks prior to that, and it wasn't a particularly successful hearing. I met with representatives of the UAW from my own state, where we have, by the way, a GM facility there. We also have Nissan and we have Volkswagen coming. But the hearing process to me is to try to get someplace. It's not about trying to destroy. It's about how do you get someplace? Okay, we have this problem. It's an important problem, or we wouldn't be having this hearing. So you hopefully devise your questions in such a way as you inform other senators, you inform the public, but also you get to a place where there's a conclusion and maybe a consensus as how to move ahead, or at least that's what I try to do in these hearings.
You were born in Orangeburg, South Carolina, and left there at 11 years old to go to Knoxville? Or
Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Chattanooga. Okay.
Yeah.
You went to the University of Tennessee.
I did.
Graduated what year?
1974.
What did you major in?
Industrial management.
You became the mayor of Chattanooga for how long and what years?
4 years, 2001 to 2005.
Much of a contest for that?
Sure. I mean, I think there were like 11 or 12 people in the race, but I was able to win on first ballot, so it was, you know, you have to have a majority to do that, and so it was but it was a tough race, yes, sir.
How big is Chattanooga in population?
160,000 in the city, about 500,000 in the metropolitan area.
There's all kinds of copy on the fact that you got Volkswagen to come to Chattanooga, and the other thing that was interesting is you worked with the Democratic governor of the state of Tennessee, right. Governor Bredesen, and there was a lot of togetherness there and all that. Why is it that politicians can come together on moving Volkswagen plants in and get so far apart on other issues?
Well, I think they can be together on other issues too, let me say, but I think that, you know, in our state in particular, we've had a tradition of people really working together for the best interest of our state. And Governor Bredesen, I used to be Commissioner of Finance for the state back in the middle 90s, which is like the chief operating officer of the state, and he was the mayor of the city of Nashville. And together with others, with lots of others, we actually recruited the Titans to the state at that time. So we have a long history of sort of involvement with each other. And so it was very easy. He's a business guy too. I mean, at the end of the day, I think he looks too at, okay, what is the outcome we're trying to achieve? I have a wonderful senior senator, which is Lamar Alexander, who is of the same ilk, and that is he wants to see good things happen. How do we figure out, how do we make that happen? And then, the local, we had actually a Democrat as one mayor and a Republican as the county mayor who worked together, and it was just easy. I mean, it was something that was going to be great for our citizens. And it was easy to work well together. Governor Bredesen calls me a lot about Medicaid issues. I actually plan to talk to Secretary Leavitt later today about a waiver that needs to occur. But look, I want good things to happen in my state. It doesn't matter to me what background or what affiliation someone is who brings a solution or a problem, and I think that's what government's about.
In January, you'll start your 3rd year as a senator.
I will, yes, sir.
Okay.
No longer a freshman, so.
And you were the 100th senator at one point.
It really wasn't that. Because I was a
96.
because I was a Republican and I was the only one, it was said that I was number 100, but they do it based on your previous service. I was actually number 96, and I remember John Tester from Montana saying to the Montana press, he said, "Can you believe I'm behind a mayor of the city of Chattanooga?" So somehow or another I was 96.
Do you know what number you'll be in January?
I don't. It'll be low 80s, I'm sure, with all the turnover.
Let's go back to these hearings. When we're taping this, the final decisions haven't been made on the automobile, I don't know what you're going to call it, bailout or whatever, but this hearing was held last week. Anyway, let's just watch this, and I'll ask you why you asked these questions.
Perfect.
Chrysler doesn't really want to be a standalone business. I mean, that's well documented. The fact is that basically what your plan is about is you want to hang around long enough so that you can date somebody and hopefully get married soon before you run out of money. And so I have to tell you, I have a little trouble when I look at that plan. I know that you haven't invested in product development. I know you don't have the technologies to really compete as a standalone. I know that your dealership levels all across the state might be really valuable to a foreign company coming in, but I have to tell you that it troubles me a little bit knowing that basically all we're really doing is providing a little capital for y'all to hang around long enough to get married. And I consider you to be a very honest broker, Mr. Nardelli. I really appreciate the conversations we've had. And so I want to ask you this question. I talked with a board member last night at Cerberus. And I know that they own 80% of your company. And I know there's been a lot of narrative, and I don't know whether this is true or not, that in essence, what they really wanted out of the purchase from Daimler-Benz was the finance companies, and the auto stuff was sort of a bonus, okay? And I talked to the board member last night and said, look, you guys are in asking us for public money today. Cerberus owns 80% of this company and has cash, lots of cash, that they are unwilling to put into this company. You mentioned about what a great partner they were. I don't know.
What were you doing? I mean, combine that with the fact that why did you go to New York and spend 2 days? And was that the only reason you went to New York, was to find out about the background on all this?
Sure. I think if you're going to look, I mean, these are 3 companies. Part of the purpose of that line of questioning was to point out these are 3 very different companies with different sets of circumstances. But I went to New York to understand those different sets of circumstances, to actually walk through the balance sheets of the public companies. Chrysler actually is private, and so you don't have the benefit of public documentation and public investors. But these 3 companies are very different. I find the whole thing is kind of odd to me that we're, quote, talking about a bailout for 3 companies that are very, very different, different circumstances, different capital structures. But the line of questioning was to point out that certainly Chrysler is very unique from GM and Ford, and we had other lines of questioning, if you will, that pointed that out as it related to the other companies.
Is it safe to assume that the public might be a little cynical when they sit and listen to the fact that, and you went through all the different reasons why this company even owns this automobile company, that the government's about to spend money on it?
Well, I think it's really odd that, first of all, the other fact is that almost any industry analyst will tell you that there's not room for 3 U.S. automakers in this country. So, you know, the supply chain works with all 3 of them and works with the transplants too. And so I know disruption could affect the supply chain in some ways. But yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of odd that Cerberus, the board member, called me the night before and I quizzed. I said, look, you guys have cash. Will you not invest? Why won't you invest in this company? And his statement was very clear. We will not invest another penny in the automotive industry. We're not going to do it. I think that's interesting to know. I think it's an interesting perspective. I in no way, by the way, am questioning Cerberus. I mean, at the end of the day, they realize it's a terrible investment, and they have people who invest in them, and those, you know, they're expecting a good yield, and they know that if they invest further dollars in Chrysler, that's not going to be the case. So I think it is important as public lenders, though, to know that and to realize that we're being asked to do something that the owners of the company themselves are unwilling to do.
Some people get very upset with the fact that there's golden parachutes and lots of big salaries and bonuses. Right. But isn't there a money thing going on here that Cerberus will not even have to worry about? There won't be no restrictions. They can make their money if they get this loan from the government.
Yeah, the indication I got from this board member was they had basically written off their equity in this company. And so again,
what does that mean, by the way?
It basically says that whatever they've invested in the company they believe has no value today. Okay, so they've written it off. They don't believe it has any value. So again, if you were going to fund a company like this, it seems to me the very first thing you would do was ensure that that's the case. In other words, make sure that the sort of the company that has this portfolio investment is not going to get anything out of this. Okay, that they basically are, to use a slang, toast. You know, they're not going to have any future benefit of this. But none of that's being talked about. And what we've tried to do is lay out from a lender's perspective, if you're a public lender, these are the things that you would want to make sure occur, not the least of which is the GM balance sheet. Again, I keep going back to GM, but we wouldn't be having this discussion if it weren't for General Motors. I think Chrysler would have already filed for bankruptcy, and I think they were actually getting ready to do that when they saw, wait a minute here, there's an opportunity for us to access some public dollars at some interesting levels of interest and really not too stringent requirements. Instead of filing for bankruptcy, GM's in trouble. They're going to go up there and talk to Congress about getting money. If we join in with them, we might access some dollars, and so they're accessing $7 billion, which is, I think, a larger amount than Cerberus ever invested in buying the company. Okay, and then Ford, of course. I've gotten to know the CEO of Ford and like him very much. Think he too is an honest broker, but Ford actually doesn't need any money today. They're burning cash at about the same level GM is, but they refinanced back in 2006, and so, you know, obviously he's an intelligent guy, and if he can come up here with GM and get a lot of money at 2.5%, then that's a good thing too. So he's here, but you get back to the whole deal is really General Motors. And the bottom line is, Brian, that General Motors cannot function as a real company with the amount of debt that they have on their balance sheet. So page 1, before any American dollar should ever be considered, is for them to restructure, to basically cause their bondholders to take about 30 cents on the dollar and convert the rest of it to equity. The bondholders would in essence own the company, but their debt level would be greatly reduced, because without them changing their capital structure, the company cannot go forward and be successful, period.
Where did you, by the way, learn all the language of capital and equity and all that stuff? Where in your life?
Well, you know, I went in business when I was 25, and I had saved $8,000 and built a company from that level that ended up operating in 18 states, building mostly shopping centers. And then I started acquiring and developing properties, and then, you know, ended up borrowing through my lifetime hundreds of millions of dollars, and fortunately paying all of that back. But, you know, we're all informed by our life experiences. I mean, that's what makes the Senate operate. Each of us has a different background. My life has been spent in business, and by the way, that doesn't make me an expert on the auto industry, certainly. I mean, these CEOs know more in their little finger about the auto industry than I do. But it does inform you as to certainly capital structures and debt. And look, during 90 and 91, for about a year and a half, I got very little sleep. I had a lot of debt, personal recourse debt, meaning it was personally, I had to pay it all back. It was upon me, not just the company. And, you know, I figured out a way to do that. But I've lived through, if you will, some very, all of us have, that I've been in business since I was 25, I'm 56 today. So, you know, I've had some experiences there, certainly not on the level of General Motors or Chrysler or Ford, but I have an understanding there that's been very helpful. I've served on bank boards, and I know a little bit about finance. And so with that, I sought additional input, if you will, and I actually have tried to present a solution that will make these companies stronger. I mean, there's some people that want to bail out, look at whatever it takes, let's give these guys some money. There are other people that say, no, we're never going to do that. I've tried to figure out a way that we could strengthen these companies without them having to go through the bankruptcy process, but the same outcomes would occur, and occur very quickly, and allow them to move ahead. We're going to be talking, this is going to be aired, I know, after the fact. I don't think that's what will have occurred when this aired through the Senate and House, but that's what I've attempted to do, is create a solution.
Would you be in favor, or do you think the same committee would be in favor of bailing out construction companies that have the very similar situation, lots of employees, lots of construction workers, the money thing that we're talking about here? What's the chances that would ever happen?
It's not going to happen.
But why not then?
Well, I think we develop these perceptions about, you know, the damage that something might do to the industry. You know, if you look at the number of jobs that these companies have already lost over the last decade, it probably dwarfs even what we're talking about now. But that's kind of the fear, and the fear that I have is, where do we go from here? Is it, look, the casino industry out in Nevada is having a tough time now. I'm being very facetious because I can't imagine him possibly doing this, but, you know, is Senator Reid going to bring forth a bailout package for the casino industry? They're having really, really tough times. My point is, and your point is, I think, where do we go from here, and who is it that we choose to bail out? I think that we're on a really slippery slope right now, and I think the magnitude of the problems that this country has because of the fact that we've over-levered. I mean, individuals' debt in relation to their income has skyrocketed over this last decade, and certainly government has led the way in creating an example for people to follow, and that we've done, certainly the federal government has done the same thing. But look, we've got a painful period of time that we have to go through as that delevering process takes place. Certainly, one of the reasons, the reason these companies are here is they're over-levered, and they cannot function at that level. And you know, there are many other companies, individuals, people, households all around this country that are in exactly the same situation.
Let's watch some more of your questioning before the auto executives.
We wouldn't be here if it weren't for GM, and we're going to talk about them in just one second. We all know this. It's almost like you lucked up. I mean, you guys were getting ready to be bankrupt, and all of a sudden GM's in trouble, and they have the sort of the clout, if you will, and Ford joins in to come up here and ask for public monies. And this is like a flyer for you guys. All of a sudden, this is life again, okay? We might get $7 billion, even though our portfolio parent won't inject any more cash in us. And I have a little trouble with that, and I wonder if you might just make me feel better about that.
Did they?
They did not, and these are all very likable people, by the way. I want you to know that. I mean, the problem with getting involved at the levels that we've gotten involved in this deal, and we've gotten involved in other trends. I mean, again, we've tried to look out what is the next big issue. Let's know as much as we can about. These are all very likable guys. I have no ill will towards any of them. I actually like all of them, including Gettelfinger at the UAW, who maybe some of the toughest questioning was with. But no, they did not. I mean, there's not a good answer for that. Okay, there's just not a good answer. And probably what needs to happen is Chrysler should either file for Chapter 11, and they could sell their Jeep brand, I think, quickly. Somebody might take the Dodge Ram brand, and then somebody, some foreign company, I think, would buy their dealership network throughout this country, and that could happen, I think, fairly quickly. Or they should merge with General Motors. I know that both companies spend a lot of time looking at a combination. I've seen a lot of information around this, and believe it or not, there's actually less public dollars necessary if they merge. Now, I know just a little bit about business to know that, you know, you shouldn't force a shotgun merger. I mean, you never know what's happening internal, but that certainly was another topic that came up, and that was that these companies merging possibly and probably would take less public dollars. I know there's some issues there with the UAW because they see that as jobs being lost in the process. But again, the kind of tough things, again, if you were a banker and you were sitting on the other side of these people and they were asking for you for a loan, there's certain things that you would say, I'll do it if, and those ifs are not going to be occurring in this process.
You know, there's something that we never hear about much anymore called antitrust in this country. And, you know, I guess legally they probably shouldn't even have been on the same airplane flying in here, but they weren't, and shouldn't be allowed to get together and talk about business and all that. But somebody that's not been talked about at all on this are the Volkswagen people that are in your city of Chattanooga, the Nissan people that are in Tennessee, and all these Toyota plants and all the other foreign plants. Why have we not heard them say, hey, is there a problem here with the World Trade Organization, all this stuff? We always hear that we shouldn't be helping competitors.
Right. That's a great point. By the way, General Motors also has a huge investment in our state. So we have General Motors, Nissan, and Volkswagen coming. The transplants actually want the three to survive, or the two. They want the American automobile industry to thrive and survive because they really rely upon the same supplier base. And there is a concern. I think it's a legitimate concern, and that's why, by the way, we've offered the suggestions that we've made that actually keep the same kind of things that might happen in bankruptcy, cause that to occur without them going into bankruptcy, because we do think the supply chain is fragile, and we think many of these suppliers are undercapitalized. Actually, General Motors in particular uses them as credit by slow pay, so they're sort of using them to finance their operations, which is putting additional burdens on their supply chain. But the transplants, Volkswagen, Nissan, Toyota, Honda, they rely upon these same suppliers, and the last thing they want to see happen is these suppliers take such a financial hit that many of them are not in business and therefore not able to supply them. So it's not the way a lot of people think. I mean, they want them to be healthy.
Where did you get the name Bencor?
I had a partner for 90 days when I went in business named Bud Bennett, and it was Ben Core, and you know, it was real simple, and 90 days later we parted in a very, very amicable way. He was just up actually visiting me with one of his sons and his wife and daughter-in-law in hearings, but anyway, that's how we came up with the name.
What year did you form Bencor, and what was it?
We incorporated June 2nd, 1978. It was a little construction company. Our first job was a $17,596 job. It was an addition to a senior citizen center. I actually built a lot of it with my own hands and dug the footings and poured the concrete. And by the time the job really started, we'd already parted ways, again, very amicably. We both put $8,000 in. We'd spent down to about $7,700, anyway, the company went ahead and continued and focused on retail. I had been a construction superintendent right out of college for about 4 years. I was the guy out in a trailer if you see a big regional mall being built or something, I was the guy in the trailer with a hard hat drinking day-old coffee who actually was in charge of building the project, and it's the best thing that ever happened to me because I learned how to build something, and that led to being able to start a company and go forward.
Did you understand all this language of, you know, the capital and equity and, you know, I wrote a bunch of this down, the product development? I mean, did you come out of school, the University of Tennessee?
I didn't. I mean, I probably could have been a better student. I did graduate on time, but, you know, I didn't. I learned through being in business. I think we're all informed, again, by our life experiences. And the construction company I had actually paid cash for everything, almost. I mean, we grew at 80% a year for 12 years, okay? So we went from the first year of doing about $500,000 to doing $62 million 12 years later, and really never borrowed any money. When we needed to buy a computer system, we paid cash. When we needed to candidly buy an airplane because we had projects scattered all over the place in small cities, we paid cash. But later on, I started acquiring things and took on lots of debt, and it's going through that process. You know, you just develop an understanding of it. I did go in my middle 30s. I went to Harvard for 3 weeks a year for 3 years, sort of tooling up a little bit. You know, the most help that was understanding there were a lot of smart people in the world, and they come from all over with different backgrounds. I didn't really develop much business acumen there. It was really just in those life experiences of borrowing money, having to pay it back, dealing with bankers, and just being involved in business.
What were your parents like? Are they still alive, by the way?
My mom and dad both are alive. My dad has Alzheimer's and is not really sort of with us mentally, but he is physically. My mother is 80 years old and very spunky and great personality. I came from what I would call you know, in my opinion, the perfect family. My parents were middle class. My dad got up every day and took a lunchbox to the DuPont plant where he was an engineer, and came home every day at 5:30. They watched all the ball games I played in life, coached a number of those. I have a sister who lives in Atlanta, is 2 years younger, and I came from, I hope, the kind of setting I've helped provide for my own daughters, but just what I would consider to be the perfect middle-class family with parents that could not be finer.
If you look at, you spent $21 million on your campaign. You ran.
I thought it was more, but
you personally spent $4.6 million.
Yes, sir.
Is that money you'll never see?
Gone.
But you made.
That's after tax money.
I mean, I don't have the figure. I had the figures in front of me. I don't know where it is, but you're worth a lot of money.
I'm not worth as much as people report, but I've done very well in life, and I have no complaints. I feel like the most blessed person in the world in every regard. My wife, my daughters, my dogs at home, to be able to be here in the United States Senate and be independent in my viewpoint, and to really be able to throw myself in it the way that I do.
Married Elizabeth in 1987.
That's correct.
2 daughters. Where are the daughters?
One is a junior at Meredith College in Raleigh. She's 21. One is a sophomore at the University of Georgia. She's 19, going to be 20 in March.
And where did you meet your wife?
I met her on a blind date. You know, I didn't get married until I was 34, and by the time you're 34, you're used to going on blind dates because everybody's, you know, got somebody they want you to meet, and it was not. We had an outstanding first date, and from that point on dated, and we were like, by the way, our personalities are oil and water. I mean, I'm a sort of a structured, you go to bed early, get up early in the morning, and focused and have a list, and she's very creative. She's an interior decorator. She's just, you know, during that time, she was staying up to 3 or 4 in the morning when we were dating, you know, working on projects, getting together, fabrics, and doing all those things. I was getting up about the time she was going to bed. We lived in different cities, but my point is that very different, and it's been a great combination. I'm very fortunate.
You ran against Bill Frist in '94.
I did.
How badly did he beat you?
It was actually pretty close. I think we ran in a primary together, and it's one of those situations that rarely happens. We became great friends in the process. And up until that time, I didn't think there was anybody that could outwork me. There were plenty of people that were more learned and had more knowledge in many areas. I knew that, but I didn't think there was anybody in this world that could outwork me. Bill Frist can go on even less sleep than I can, and he beat me in a primary. I think it was something like 42 to 33 or 4, and we had some other candidates in the race, but it actually just moved apart at the end. About 3 weeks out, we were actually almost dead even. But great race, and then he went on. By the way, nobody thought either one of us could win the general election because Jim Sasser was the opponent. He was getting ready to be the majority leader, and actually, as we campaigned around the state, people kind of would pat us on the head and say, it's nice that you two young guys are running, but you know, you have no chance whatsoever of winning the general election. And then when Bill's race was over in November, literally as soon as the polls closed, they announced him the winner. He had won by a huge margin.
We're going through a period where we're looking at people like the CEOs of these companies and all the money they make, and there's a lot of people in this country that are upset about that. And they even want bonuses when their company loses $11 billion. I mean, it's hard for the average person to understand that. I'm leading up to a question, though, about you're now inside the United States Senate, one of 100, and if you look back at Tennessee, your partner in crime from Tennessee is Lamar Alexander.
Right.
He used to be president of the University of Tennessee. You went there.
Right.
The 5th largest contributor to your campaign is from something called Baker Donaldson, which I believe is Howard Baker. It's about $44,000 that that firm gave to you.
Right.
You pick up, I went to his website, Baker Donaldson website, and they list on there the fact that they're one of the 100 largest law firms in the country. And then they list the kind of people that are in the law firm. And the list goes on and on. Chief of Staff to the President, United States Senate Majority Leader, Ambassador to Japan, Ambassador to Turkey, Ambassador to Saudi Arabia, Governor of Tennessee, Governor of Mississippi. Point I'm making here is you've seen it now up close. Are these connections too close? The people that have access because of money. Now that you've seen it inside, should the public outside worry at all that everybody's too close in this process and that decisions aren't being made for the goodness of the public instead of the goodness of different companies and law firms?
I think that's a great question, and certainly I was thrilled that Howard Baker would support me. I was just down at the Baker Library opening in Knoxville and was asked to say a few words, and he's one of my heroes. I think the way he conducted himself here is an example for all of us. His temperament, he's one of my heroes, so I was thrilled that he supported me and others. You know, what I found is certainly, look, I'm not an appropriator. I don't like our appropriations process. And I think that people in this country have a right to be concerned about the way their dollars are appropriated. I think the biggest concern that the public should have is in that sphere. Okay, what's happening to cause these dollars to go to this city or to this state, and who's involved in that process? So I'm not an appropriator. I don't want to ever be an appropriator. And so I would sort of move that piece over. By the way, I'm not saying appropriators are bad either. We have my colleague in the Senate, Lamar Alexander, I think is an outstanding appropriator, and I think sets a high watermark as far as the way people should conduct themselves. But I think that...
Let me stop you. Okay. Ask you, define what an appropriator is in your opinion.
Well, an appropriator are those people in the Senate that decide how dollars are going to be spent, okay? You know, the earmarking process is centered around, look, appropriators having powerful seats and being able to direct money in certain directions. And that's an area that I do think needs tremendous reform in our country. So let's move away from the government relations folks who deal with appropriators, okay? Not saying that any of them are bad, but saying that's a place where one's antenna ought to be way up, okay? So then let's move to the issues that we're involved in. Many of the government relations people that we deal with, to me, are people who come in and can state, look, at the end of the day, I'm sort of the judge, okay? When somebody comes in, I've got to take a position on a particular topic, and to have someone who can come in and knows that you're busy and can bring their client in and make sure their client is disciplined and spends 15 minutes hitting the major points and then leaving, that's actually been an asset, okay? I just have to tell you. And so obviously on any topic, we want to talk to all involved, okay? Just like on this auto dealers thing. We want to talk to the UAW, but we want to talk to the companies, we want to talk to the bondholders, we want to talk to the private sector, we want to get the dealers who just left my office right before coming over here. So that's what we try to do, and you know, should the fact that people gave money to us, you know, should that affect people? Well, it doesn't affect us in one way. I mean, it's, you know, we look at people and tell them, I'm sorry, we just don't agree. I remember that, matter of fact, one company that had the very first fundraiser for me up here in Washington, I mean, they did it during the primary. I mean, I remember it well. Well, the biggest issue that they cared about came up during my first year, and they came in to see me, and I hated it. I thanked them. I was so glad that they had helped me be here, but I had to tell them, I'm sorry, I just absolutely disagree. And as a matter of fact, I don't just disagree, I'm going to use every ounce of energy that I have to keep that from happening. So I think it depends on who you are. I look at this as a 6-year lease that the public has given me to try to solve our country's problems. I look at that as a tremendous honor, and I can't imagine anyone wasting even 5 minutes of that time doing something that they don't believe is in our country's best interest. And I really believe that, and I think there are a lot of people like me here. I also think there are people that let their guard down and get comfortable and have been here for a while, and sometimes they slip into a culture that's probably not healthy.
What is the impact in the United States Senate because of what happened to Senator Ted Stevens? Convicted of 7 counts
Yeah.
of violating the ethics rules of the Senate.
Yeah, I
mean, is there any direct, do colleagues talk about it? You say, how do we prevent ourselves from getting into that situation? I know it's still on appeal.
Oh, we definitely, but look, you know, it was actually talked about all last year. You know, I found, one thing I do wish the American public and you could witness are the lunch meetings that we have on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday on the Republican side. The Democrats do the same thing. I don't know what the format of those luncheons are, but there are a lot of frank discussions.
We'll be glad to bring our cameras.
Well, you know, the only problem is it will probably change the topic and certainly the tone. But I think it's in those meetings where there's a lot of honesty. Not that I'm not talking about dishonesty or honesty as it relates to ethics, but honesty as people talking about how they truly feel about issues and about things like you just brought up. And I think I know that those discussions took place all this last year. There's been a real concern about the appropriations process and causing it to be transparent. And again, we have many great appropriators, but there's always those people. It's just life. I mean, the Senate is a reflection, let's face it, of our society, and there are just some people that sort of forget where they are and forget what walls need to be raised to make sure that problems aren't created.
By the way, what is your sense of what would happen to Senator Stevens if he hadn't lost? Would the Senate have thrown him out?
Look, let me put it a different way, and I've said this publicly before. I don't think there's a senator in the Senate that believes that someone who's been convicted of a felony can serve in the Senate. I'll put it that way.
Let's go to another clip.
Okay.
This time it's about Mr. Gettelfinger. Let's watch.
Okay.
Look, I was a card-carrying union person in my earlier life, and I was a trustee on a pension fund to make sure that people got good benefits. And I prided myself in paying our employees above industry standard wages always. The problem is that you have this built-in problem that's not going to be solved unless it's forced to be solved. And there's no way that Mr. Gettelfinger, there's no way that he's going to sit down and do the things that he has to do to make you competitive unless he knows the end game is bankruptcy. He's not going to do it. It's not possible. He can't get his membership. It's not just that he's not the best there is at Dale Carnegie attributes, okay? He can't make it happen with his membership without that happening. So I would just say to the chairman, I realize that we will have a partisan divide on some of these issues, but it sounds to me like everybody's senses, if you will, are pretty alive right now and are willing to do some things that might make sense for the company. And usually when this government says we're here to help you, most people run away. And that's for good reason. I actually see that a big stick by the government, in this case, could actually cause your company, for the first time in modern history, to have the tools and the leverage to actually do the things that will make you strong for the future. Because the fact of the matter is, you have to build a company that can do well during the troughs, right?
Sure.
And that's not where you are, and then do really well during the peaks because they come every 7 or 8 years.
What's a Dale Carnegie attribute?
Well, he's he has a winning personality, and you learn how to win friends and influence people. We had probably 25 or 30 people in our company, if you will, in my first company that went through that. We had people who were sort of timid about talking with others and doing things, who went through these can process some tools that are helpful to people. My point is that
was that your idea, to do the Dale Carnegie course?
Sure. I did it myself first, and then I caused 25, maybe 30 people in our company to go through that, and lots of other things, by the way, just to help with their careers and their advancement and their ability to deal with other people.
And who was he? Dale Carnegie.
He obviously was a person, you know him well, and have read, I'm sure, little excerpts, but he was a person who, developed some fundamentals that are necessary for human beings to be able to relate with each other in ways that are healthy and positive. And Mr. Gettelfinger, I think, by the way, has those attributes. I met with some of the UAW folks from our state that are part of the GM plant in Tennessee, and they say the guy's been outstanding, and he may well be the best that's ever been. The problem is that there's no way he can make the right things happen within his own membership, because it has to do with them decreasing wages. And by the way, doing away, this is one thing that I think people haven't focused on enough. In Chrysler, they have a contract where when their plants are idled, they have to pay 95% of the wages of those employees for up in most cases to 4 years. Well, there's just not many companies that can survive with those types of arrangements. So to me, as part of this, Mr. Gettelfinger needs to get the UAW to cause the employees of these companies to be on parity with the transplants, Honda, Toyota, Nissan. I know he can't do that by year end, but he could do it by March 31st if he knew that if they didn't, they would be forced into Chapter 11 bankruptcy. But again, that's the stick that I'm talking about. By the time we're talking, a package will have passed. I don't think it'll have those elements in it, but it's a shame because we're missing a tremendous opportunity.
Why won't it have those elements in it?
Look, these kind of things used to offend me, if you will, to think about. So why wouldn't people just do these things? But at the end of the day, look, each party has their constituencies, and I understand that. They're not, it's not like it's homogenous, but there are general leanings, if you will, and the UAW, supports heavily the other side of the aisle, and I understand how it would be very difficult for the other side of the aisle to put in place tough requirements on them to get on parity with the transplants.
What, in your opinion, is a fair, it's not a wage, what's fair in business, as far, especially these businesses that have a handout to government? What kind of money should the CEO of General Motors make right now?
Well, you know, of course, they've agreed to make $1.
Yeah, but they made $20 million last year.
Yeah. I don't know what the number, by the way.
Whatever the money. I mean, the point is, they all say
yeah.
they're going to make one for $1 this year, but they've been paid millions and millions of dollars in bad years in the last 5 years, for instance.
Yeah, I think, look, one of the questions I asked as they came into our offices was their entire, how much of their net worth was actually tied up in the company. And obviously the big part of their net worth in these cases, is, at least with GM, I think, is tied up in the company. But I think that look, it is atrocious what's happened. I think when you're in private business like I was, you're the last guy to get paid. I'm sorry. I mean, everybody else gets paid first. You know, if the company goes down, the loans that these guys are not going to be able to pay back are not recourse to them personally. In our case, look, I lose my home. I lose everything I have if it fails. And so I think what we've seen are huge excesses in these public companies. And I think that's a turn-off to every single American, okay, regardless of where you come from, is to see the fact that public companies, the CEOs, can make lots of money. And if you look at what's happened in many of the financial institutions, and all of it evaporate in the last quarter after tremendous bonuses have been made, that's just wrong. And I think we're going to see, as a result of all of us sort of watching what's occurring in these public companies, I think you're going to see them self-policing and setting in place, hopefully, new ways of the plowbacks of we can get this money back if, or you never get it actually until we see that over a 3 or 4 year period we've actually had real successes. But it's obviously a turn-off to all of us, certainly to me, it needs to be rectified. And hopefully these companies, with all this public scrutiny, realize how obnoxious it is, and then here public taxpayers. I think that's what's been so, we've had lots of calls, okay, and we've been involved in doing what we can to try to make the rescue package as good as it could be as it related to taxpayer protections. But I think that's one of the greatest objections by the public, is seeing people who make this much money being able to survive after that. And yet we do have to have a functioning financial system for this country to operate.
You said earlier they're real nice guys and you like them and all that kind of stuff, but what kind of people run a company in real trouble that each get on multi-million-dollar airplanes and fly to Washington and never give it a thought? And then everybody's surprised when they get asked about it, and that becomes the lead story everywhere. Yeah. Where's your head on that?
Well, I think, again, first of all, let me say that I really do try to focus on the substance. And the airplane thing was a fiasco, and, you do have to wonder, where's your head? I mean, think about some degree of public relations here. And they weren't just private planes, by the way. They were like exceptionally nice private planes. I don't want to focus on those things, okay? I know that, hopefully they know they messed up and they drove. And candidly, I don't want to see the CEO of a company that's stalling out, and candidly, really, it's already bankrupt. They just haven't gone through the process. I don't want to see them wasting 6 or 8 hours driving to Washington either, okay? I mean, our lowest staff member catches a commercial flight because there's only so many hours in the day.
But what's wrong? But let me just, what's wrong with just getting on an airplane, paying a coach fare, and sitting in coach?
That's what I do every week.
But I mean, where is this mentality coming from?
I think what it did, it's kind of like the check cashing that took place here in the early 90s, where you had people bouncing checks. The American public could identify with that and say, gosh, I can't do that. Why are they? And I think this is something that they identified with, and it points out, as you're pointing out in this discussion, this the culture of people who are just not, they're sort of out of touch, if you will, and with the way the world is, if you will, and certainly they paid the price for it.
There's a story told in the first couple of years that you were here that you learned something from Lamar Alexander when he ran for minority whip in the Senate.
Yeah.
What's that story?
Well, it's I think it really goes back to something I heard Howard Baker say. He ran a couple of times for leader and I think was unsuccessful. And someone asked him, he said, well, is it true, he said, will senators sometimes not tell you the truth? Or something like this. I'm paraphrasing it and not doing as good a job. He's much more eloquent. And his answer was, some. Okay, when I saw Lamar after the vote, his face was white. I mean, he had calculated how many votes he had and knew he was going to win the race. When the vote was over, I looked across the room and he was white. I mean, just white. It was incredible. He regained.
He's been around here for years.
He's been around for a while and knew Howard Baker really well and sort of had watched what had happened a couple times in his elections. So anyway, Lamar composed himself, though. I was a freshman that year, and when they had this orientation, and about 3 hours later, Lamar was presiding over this orientation process, and he had gotten himself together. He had, his face was back to its normal color, and he said to the group, one Republican and 9 or 10 Democrats, I was the only Republican in that class, he said, I'm glad to be here before you. I spent the afternoon writing 27 letters thanking senators for the 25 votes I got. I just thought it was pretty funny and just an interesting thing just to sort of know and think about as you move ahead.
We just have a minute and a half or so. Assess this job, not whether you proud to serve the state of Tennessee, but assess the job, compare it to being mayor, running the financial operation of the state, and then building your own businesses.
Well, look, when you're in business or when you're the mayor or when you're commissioner of finance of the state, in our state, because of the way that's set up, look, you set the agenda. You wake up every day, you make things happen. You have a vision and you make it a reality, and it's a wonderful place to be. This is different. This is like being on the board of directors and not being the CEO. And what you have to do here, in my opinion, and everybody has their own style, but what you do is you think, what is that big issue that's coming down the pike? And you prepare yourself well, which is, by the way, intellectually incredibly stimulating to do that. It really is. I went to Europe and spent time with carbon traders before the cap and trade debate this summer and developed a vocabulary around carbon cap and trade that few people in the Senate actually have. After this debate this summer, certainly many do now, but I think it's an influencing thing. It's not setting the agenda, and you don't know when the issues are going to come up. But it's a wonderful place to be. It's intellectually incredibly challenging, and if you apply yourself, people will listen, and you can make a difference.
This is a bit risky because we're taping this before the vote, but what do you think in the end will be your vote for or against?
Okay, today, and please, with all the caveats you're mentioning, I have seen the White House proposal. I've seen the House Democrats' response. And unfortunately, because I always want to be somebody who's for something, unfortunately, because of the way it's unfolding, I think I'm going to have to vote against it.
We're out of time, Senator Bob Corker. We'll find out, though, and we'll let the audience know. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
2 days after this interview, Senator Corker went to the Senate floor to introduce alternative legislation to the $14 billion proposed for the automakers.
Let's go ahead and fund the money. Let's fund the money that's been requested. To Republicans, that's like debtor in possession financing anyway, because these companies are basically bankrupt. To Democrats, the funding is in place to cause these companies to be whole. So let's go ahead and fund the request that has taken place. And let's have 3 covenants, only 3 covenants. We can do this with a very short bill, which we drafted, 3 covenants. The first covenant is that by March 15th, the outstanding indebtedness at the 2 companies that are going to apply for this has to be reduced by 2/3, or the companies have to file for bankruptcy on March the 15th. That gives the companies, it gives the bondholders, which we've talked to on the phone, plenty of incentive to make sure that the debt is reduced by 2/3, so these companies have a capital structure that allows them to go forward. This is the only way they're going to be successful. We've had plenty of people testify and say that if we put our money on top of the $62 billion in debt that GM has, there's no way they can be successful. Even if we're selling 20 million cars, a year in our country, and today we know we're selling at a $10 million rate. So that's number one. Give them the money. If by March 15th they haven't reduced their capital structure in that regard, and by the way, we've talked to people on all sides who believe this can happen, but it can only happen with the stick of government, meaning that we're going to force them into bankruptcy if they don't do this. That's the first covenant. The second covenant is, and I've listened to Mr. Gettelfinger's testimony and talked to him on the phone this morning, okay? He says the only way the UAW can make concessions is if they see the bondholders have done so first. This legislation makes that happen by March the 15th. So secondly, after the UAW has seen that the bondholders have, quote, taken a haircut, a word that's used around here a lot, they have to do two things. Number one, they have to convert half of the VEBA obligations, the Voluntary Employee Benefit Association obligations, they have to convert half of those to equity. If the company goes bankrupt, these future payments are never going to happen anyway. And that, again, that reduces the debt at GM by another $10.5 billion. And it gives the UAW equity in a company that actually has value now because the debt by the bondholders has been reduced too. That's the second covenant. Very, very simple. And then the third thing they have to do is at that same public meeting where they take a vote, they have to agree to have a contract in place that puts them on parity with companies like Toyota and Nissan and Volkswagen and other companies here in our country. Now, before everybody goes crazy over that, that is as certified by the Secretary of Labor. That's not something we prescribe. I realize there are subtleties in that. There are comparisons that have to be made. And by the way, just to my friends on the left, that would be a Secretary of Labor by the Obama administration, okay, that has the ability to look at the various differences and nuances to actually certify that.
The Senate subsequently failed to reach agreement on the issue. For a DVD copy of this program, call 1-877-662-7726. For free transcripts or to give us your comments about this program, visit us at Q&A.org. Q&A programs are also available as C-SPAN podcasts.